Sorry about that, everybody. Yes, I'm thrilled to be here today with Kamala Red from New York City. She's an adult ed teacher at the Mid-Manhattan Learning Center. And I've been very privileged to get to know her because for many years she has had her students write and submit articles for the Change Agent. And I feel like I've gotten to know her as an amazing teacher in that way. And now for the first time, we get to co-present here together. And I think we're just really lucky to be able to hear from her how she teaches about race and equity in the classroom. And my name is Cynthia. I'm the editor of The Change Agent, and The Change Agent has always tried to put a lot of attention into the racial equity dimension of whatever topic we're covering. So that's how we're going to go forward here today. Our agenda, just very quickly, we're going to try to talk about why we think it's important to talk about race and racism in the classroom, and then also how. So those are the two main components of our lightning talk. So the first answer to the question why that we came up with is that it builds community in the classroom. And we have a picture here of a class in Arizona that is an example of an adult ed class that put a lot of attention to race and racism. And it's a key thing that happens is when you have hard conversations, you start to build trust with each other in a different way. People sort of show themselves more, they take risks. And if as an adult ed teacher, you can kind of build a safe space in your classroom for people to be able to show themselves, it really builds community. And that is a great driver of persistence and of more learning because people trust each other and feel safe together. Another, I realize I should be in presentation mode here. Another reason why we want to talk about race in the classroom is because our students want us to, honestly. And when the Change Agent put together a special issue called Talking About Race, we made sure to really lead with student voices about answering the why question. And they say themselves, listen, there's so much confusing messages about race. And as an immigrant, I have come to this country with so many confusing messages about race. Please, help me understand this better. So our students are actually clamoring, to talk about this. Granted, it can be a hard topic. Granted, it can be challenging, and it's not something to just take lightly, but it is something to sort of orient yourself towards and start trying to figure out a way that would work for you in your classroom to address it. One more reason for me, and then we're going to go to Kamala. Why talk about race? It's relevant to our learners. Racism and systemic inequities rooted in racism really get in the way of our students being able to achieve their academic goals and their work and career goals. So if you can take on small chunks of it in the classroom, you could actually be helping a student address a very real obstacle that's right in front of them and that will help them achieve their goals. It's an extremely relevant topic, not just for their individual lives, but the national dialogue, things that are happening in people's communities and in their families and the challenges that their children are facing. And we know from the persistence drivers that when a topic feels really relevant to a student, they're able to persist in their education. So with that, let me go over to Kamala. She's going to take it from here.
Hi, everybody. Yes, why should we talk about race and equity? Well, it's the elephant in the room. It's the topic that needs to be spoken about. And we've been witnessing a really unique period where all of the inequities and disparities are coming to the forefront. And so it provides an opportunity for us to really address the why. These issues are very pertinent to our country. Our democracy relies on participation, and if our students aren't having a voice, then their needs aren't met. So it's important for us to encourage them to participate through having an opinion, advocating for themselves, and using that voice to extend to their families and to their communities so that they can participate more effectively. So, how do we do it? That's the challenge. For me, I have a very diverse population, and it's constantly changing because we have rolling admissions. So it's an area where it's infused throughout my curriculum. I'm always looking for ways to encourage students to converse. In order to do that, icebreakers are a daily occurrence because sometimes you'll have different populations of people in the classroom on a daily basis. So just to highlight a couple of things today, I start off with class values, for example. I want my students to know that, again, that it's a safe space, that it's okay to have an opinion, and that we have to respect one another's opinions. So I'll do, an across poem. Instead of doing class rules, I'll say class values, and we'll use a word like respect, and I'll make sure that tolerance is the T, because it's important that we tolerate different viewpoints. And if there are differences of opinion, all the better. We can discuss it. We can learn from one another. Um, so these conversations are not easy, and they must be ongoing. And you don't just jump into a heavy topic like race without having a degree of comfort with one another, and to understand that we're not going to be attacking one another, that we have a lot more commonalities than we may think. So just to highlight one area that I focus on quite a bit is building common ground. I like an activity called an identity map. It's one that is very useful because it allows students to self-identify aspects of their lives that they want to share. I encourage students to pair up after they've made their own identity map, and we'll see what are the similarities, what are the differences. Share something surprising that you learn. Adults sometimes can build walls, so it can be difficult for them to make themselves vulnerable. And it's an important part of learning is feeling that you're not going to be ridiculed for an opinion or a belief or an aspect of your identity. So that's one of my favorites. I've had a lot of rich conversation come out of that, and students are very surprised. Oh, I have five sisters too. I've been there. Oh, wow. Tell me about that. So anything that gets students talking will open the door for other conversations that may be more difficult. And for that reason, it's important that you meet students where they're at. We have so much going on in our lives that not everybody is on equal footing, especially within the digital world. So it's important that you survey your students. I actually have an online survey that I create. So even before we've met, I have a sense of the hours that work best and some of those logistics. What are your life demands? Some students are sharing computers with their kids. So it's important to get that groundwork. And one of the greatest tools that I use are journal prompts. I think that it's important to recognize that we're in constant getting to know you mode. And in order to be effective in that way, you have to kind of harvest where their interests lie, what makes them tick, so that you can gather up resources and have them at the ready, to engage, keep them engaged in topics that are rich and relevant to them. Student-driven learning is essential in this regard. So I want to have a good pool of materials, and I don't want to just pick randomly. I want things that they're interested in. Journal prompts, you'll receive lots of resistance. Students aren't really enjoying writing for the most part. So if you're sure to model, I always take part in journal prompts. I don't demand that you share, but I invite them to share because I want them to know that we're getting to know each other. And the deeper our relationship, the richer the rewards. And we're a learning community and we learn from each other. So I've had surprising outcomes from journal prompts where someone who was very guarded may in fact share in a way that allows you to see a glimpse of where that person's coming from. And you'll find that there's a lot more commonalities, like this student who recognized, something in herself that disadvantaged her, but it it motivated her, in fact, to improve uh, her life and for herself and for her child. So it's important that we remember that our students are very dynamic, and in order to meet their needs, sometimes there needs to be a bit of an unloading. And as was emphasized earlier by Cynthia, um, once they get over or grapple with, not necessarily get over, but grapple with or address some of the issues that have been obstacles for them, it will open up the world of learning. And racism and equity is so pervasive and so painful, that it does prevent learning to occur. People feel defeated, and challenges to their esteem have been roadblocks for some time. So now they're in a position to turn that disappointment around, and we have to be present and encouraging and validate where they're at. You have to be flexible. You have to persevere. You have to pull every trick you've got out the bag. You may be very committed to a certain journal prompt, but you want to give enough diversity and choices and options, because you never know what might trigger someone that might bring out a very rich response. I find that connection between the writing and the healing and the empathy and all of these ideas kind of percolate in the classroom and create for a stew that is so rich, and so other conversations can come out. Many ideas will emerge and you have to tap into them. This particular student was very guarded, and only chimed in to pass judgment. And I find that I was always encouraging her to, tolerate the opinions of others and the perspectives of others. And I was very pleased when she came to that recognition herself, just through a quote. So, there's a variety of strategies you can use, but I really appreciate quotes. So. I'm not a teacher that professes to be an expert. My students understand that I'm a teacher, but I'm also a learner. I cultivate that in the classroom. We're a learning community. So the idea is to encourage each student's voice, and you're going to use as many strategies as you can. There's so many rich ones out there. For example, this is a lesson I use from Facing History. And it's just the story of a gentleman who's on a train, and how, well, I'm not going to get all into that for time's sake. But one of the things that was especially effective is that I asked the students to write from a different perspective. Here was this gentleman, Puerto Rican gentleman who's on a train, and he has certain values that he holds, that he taught, that he was taught, and how that conflicted. So, can examine stereotypes and identity. And my students really, this appealed to them because they understood how judgmental society can be. And so I got very a plethora of responses, some as unique as a student wrote about how she had the experience of being on a train, and someone woke up, someone had been taking a picture of her, and it addressed some issues that she had been grappling with about being overweight. And so she wrote from both perspectives, the woman who took the photograph and why she felt like she needed to do that. And just a lot of rich conversation from not just in the area of race, but just inequity, chipping away at some of the misconceptions that we hold, and the bias. Addressing these things are just essential for the learning process. My favorite resource is, without a doubt, the Change Agent. I so appreciate the fact that there are articles from all over the country, from students just like mine, who are reading at different levels. And I find that to be immeasurably inspiring. It allows me to address a variety of themes, and the richness of it is grand for content, and also if you're a low-level reader, you've got the audio, and it's a tool that is amazing to draw from in terms of journal prompts as well. Because when there's a call for articles, there'll be a whole list of prompts there, and I may draw from them to just encourage contemplation and weighing of everything from argumentative to informational, just a lot of very rich content. So it supports the reading skills in addition to the graphics, from animation, cartoon, political cartoons, to graphs. So it's an amazing resource. My students have been writing for the Change Agent for, I guess, 5 to 10 years again. But the topics that we tap in on are always rich, and from prison industrial complex to employment to mental health to technology. This is a sample of just a few of the articles that some of my students have written more recently. And, you can really find the hidden gems within the student. It's very empowering. This issue, I believe, was mental health. And some students need very little coaxing, while others are really grappling with the issues of mental health. And in the process of exploring many subjects, I'll find that students are in a position to actually give advice. One of my students there in the center, Christiana, had a lot of pain in her background. But in this issue, which was the mental health, I believe she was responding to a prompt, a journal prompt, which was, how do you maintain, a positive outlook. And in organizing her ideas, she was able to actually elevate music as something that has been a tool for healing throughout her life. And many of the students, definitely related to that. And everyone was so proud that she was able to bring that out. The process was so challenging in terms of online exchanges. But she didn't have the greatest technology, so she would write, she would take a picture, however she could disseminate it to me. I would take it, we would talk on the phone. You have to meet them where they're at, but you'll be surprised what can come out of it. I'm sorry, for time's sake, I wanted to talk about the process, but you'll have to get to know your students and just guide them. They've got the ideas, bring out the evidence, right? Do a little research to bring to bear on your opinions. They really flourish. It's expanded so many opportunities for them. One of my students, actually, after that, we did some work with poetry, and she wrote a very moving poem about some of the police violence, and was selected, by the by the chancellor as a poet, a representative for our district. So it's been very empowering, but also it's painful. You're going to unearth some things that are challenging. So, our whole social, emotional learning thrust, it's right on point, because racism and equity is very present. Tapping into strengths, transforming that power, and allowing them to make those courageous new choices. A resource that I tapped in on more recently was the Google Slides that the Change Agent has, talking about systemic racism, internalized racism. My students really responded to this. That it was great when we were online and people could review this at their own pace. I taught it as a lesson, but I posted it so it could be reviewed, and there was a lot of rich responses from that as well.
Thank you so much, Kamala. That was really, really powerful and uplifting. And I want to just mention that when Kamala and I were meeting to plan these slides and this conversation, she kept saying, "Oh my God, this just sounds too much like Psychology 101." But I see one of the aspects, one of the dimensions of being a teacher is actually being able to meet people where they're at, support them socially and emotionally, and still be teaching, but being able to take into account those other aspects of being human, especially when we're taking on a hard topic like race and inequity. So thank you so much. I want to just end by mentioning a couple of things. One is a new law has a provision in it called the Affordable Connectivity Program. And many of our students will be able to use this program to access subsidized broadband access and subsidized devices. So there is a link there. You can click at that page. You can click on a button that says apply now. Of course, it's not very straightforward to apply. You have to prove that you're at this level of the poverty level and various things. There's going to be some paperwork marshaling, but I really think it would be a great idea for teachers to start developing some explicit instruction with their students around how to access these resources. This is a really big deal. It's a big extension of that emergency broadband benefit that was in place before. Another thing, when we're thinking about remote access and equity, it's not just the broadband and the devices, though those of course are critical. It's also the idea of having a space in your house or your home or somewhere in your community where you can sanely participate in class. And so that is just another dimension of equity around remote learning that we need to pay attention to. So Kamala talked about a survey for her students where she finds out from them, you know, what technology do you have? You know, do you have a room in your house where you can be? You know, do you have time in the day that works for you? So that kind of thing is an important aspect of equity when it comes to remote learning. Just a couple quick things. You know, the change agent has diverse voices on diverse topics and also diverse formats. So far, we've seen that the articles are available in PDF. Kamala mentioned that she also has been using the Google slide versions of our articles. And here's a list of 4 more, which you can access through the lesson packets on the Change Agent website. These are free. You don't need a subscription to get these. And I'm just highlighting these because they are particularly about race. But to address racism, you don't always have to be taking on racism per se. You can also just be sharing voices of people of color talking about whatever matters to them. And that's another way to address racism, is just by lifting up those voices. So you'll be getting a copy of these slides, and there's some handouts that you can click on and just immediately have access to, and also a slide with a bunch of resources. And I'll just leave you with our contact information. It's been such a pleasure to work with you, Kamala, and with you, Jamie and Destiny and Rachel and Ebony, just pulling this whole thing together. Thank you so much.